Welcome into episode 393 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Brew and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, the Bruins are 3-0-1 in their last four games. It was a very rocky start to the month of January. It is still, it hasn't been a great month for them as a whole. But as I said, 3-0-1 in their last four games, 7 out of a possible 8 points. The most recent game, a 6-3 win over the San Jose Sharks in Boston. And then also, since we last recorded, the Bruins lost 6-5 to the Senators up in Ottawa, which was a very important game. Both teams battling for playoff positioning, and they play again later on this week. But first and foremost, Bridget and Scott, how are you guys doing? And let's get right into your opening shifts.
I'm tired, but we're good. We're good. A lot of hockey this week. So I guess we'll start with my opening shift, which is Charlie Coyle getting the game-tying and then game-winning goal. And it's been a long time coming for him. He went 10 games without scoring a goal. And this is his second multi-goal game of the season. The other one was against Montreal well before this one, so back in the first half. So, he looked good, and it's as a winger too, right? Like he's not centering that line. It's a line of Marchand, Poitras, and Coyle on the right side. They end up moving Elias Lindholm to third line center, which we'll talk about later. But it was a much needed production from Charlie Coyle, who also did a lot against Ottawa, but just wasn't finishing. And I think I saw Brian tweet about this. It's like it just wasn't going, including in the shootout. He wasn't able to score on his shootout chance and on a breakaway chance before that. So in this game against the Sharks, he did put two in. They were the two most important goals in the game because they got the Bruins out of their hole. They were losing 3-2. They end up winning 4-3. And I know, Scott, you're going to talk about someone else that was on that line centering it, which is Matt Poitras.
Yeah, Poitras gets the primary assist on both of Coyle's goals. First one is good offensive zone cycle shift for that line, which they didn't have a lot of those shifts the first two periods. They had several of them in the third. And Poitras ends up with the nice backhand feed to Coyle for the finish. Second one, Lohrei starts the transition, kind of half fumbles, half passes the puck to Poitras, who takes over from there, dishes to Coyle, who ends up banking that one in off of Yaroslav Askarov, the Sharks goalie. But yeah, I think this game on Monday, the win over the Sharks, made a really good case for playing the kids more, because that could have been a really embarrassing loss to the worst team in the NHL. And Poitras and Lohrei are two of the biggest reasons that the Bruins came storming back in the third period and end up with the empty netters tacked on, ends up looking like a fairly comfortable win, but was anything but a comfortable game through two periods. And they do it in elevated roles. Poitras, as you mentioned, Bridget, on the second line, gets moved up into the top six. Lohrei led the team in minutes, played over 23 minutes. Season high for him, second highest total of his career. And I thought he was just really good all game long. 5-on-5, all the analytics were impressive. Gets the assist. He's a +3. Also thought he did a really good job running the power play, which scored once, and then the second power play was really good, just didn't score. They had it in the zone the whole time, and he was out there for all 2 minutes running it. So, I think the column that I wrote after the game, like, this was my end of it, was like, playing the kids more doesn't have to mean that you're giving up on the season. In fact, it might actually help you salvage this season. And this was a good example of that.
And also, quick shout out to another call up, because obviously Poitras came up and he's been playing well since he got called up. Lettieri has goals in both of the last two games. So he had a tip-in goal today, went to the net. He came and he produced, and we've seen other guys get called up, and even if we think they've played well in their time, they haven't impacted the score sheet. the way that Lettieri has in his call-up. So just a quick shout out for him as well, because we don't get a chance to talk about him much. He's not a guy that we're like, oh, they need to call this guy up. But since he has come up, he's done a lot.
They are dancing in the streets in the North End and Federal Hill. Vinny is definitely making the most of this call-up. Just a couple notes from this game. Charlie Coyle, revenge game? Question mark. Former San Jose Shark draft pick, I think so. Over a decade later, he really had to get that revenge.
Traded away in the trade that brought Brent Burns to San Jose.
Right. Obviously Poitras, Lohrei, great games. Scott, your point about playing the kids actually potentially helping the Bruins, get to the playoffs as opposed to hindering them. It's what we've talked about, which is they like to go with a bit of a risk adverse, strategy of playing, more safe NHL players. Okay, but that might actually backfire because, it could get to a stagnant lineup that can't score. So while yes, there's some defensive growing pains for some younger players, this whole entire Bruins team has had defensive lapses multiple times every game, from rookies all the way up to 10 plus year veterans. So we can definitely get more into that. But for me, look, the month of January, as I said, has been Jekyll and Hyde for the Bruins. They're 3-4-2. They've, as a team, collected 7 of a possible 18 points this month, which we spoke weeks ago about how important this month actually was for this team, and it's not over yet. But so far, they haven't exactly lit the world on fire this month. However, a really positive development has been the month of David Pastrnak, because in addition to some of the young kids playing, that's great, but they need David Pastrnak to far and away be their best player. And through 9 games this month, he has 9 goals, 7 assists, and 16 points. That includes 3 multi-goal games. And he also has a 4-game goal streak going right now. I think outside of the scoring, he has been very engaged with and without the puck. Thought he was noticeably physical in the Ottawa game. So I think Pasternak's development has been really positive this month, and they're going to need that going forward the rest of the way if they want to get to the playoffs.
I thought that line looked great today, or I should say, when people are listening to this, it will be Tuesday. But on Monday, Geeky started out, rang a post. Saka and Pasta always seem to have good chemistry together. That line, keeping that line together, even though there was a lot of other changes in the lineup today, was the right move. I thought they played well. And a lot of times it's Pasta that's setting up or starting the good puck movement and involved in setting up those plays, even if he's setting up Geeky or Zaka for good chances. Like, he's involved a lot with that line, and his production has certainly gone up. I mean, there was a point not that long ago we were talking about, is he playing hurt a little bit? Like, because he kind of looked a little bit like half a step behind. And there were comments that he made about, not feeling like he was at his best. And then you see he's kind of pulled himself out of what was like a mini funk, and he's played better over the last few games.
Yeah, he's the NHL's leading scorer in the month of January. 16 points, more than anyone else. 9 goals, also more than anyone else. So yeah, he has come roaring to life in a huge way this month. And it's weird. Like, I think the Geeky Zaka Pastrnak line has been doing some good things for a while. Like, I thought they had a really good December too. And Pastrnak still wasn't really scoring like he was used to. That was kind of a month of more assists. But that was when Geeky started to pick it up. Now that Pastrnak is scoring the way we expect Pastrnak to score, all of a sudden, like, you look at that and you're like, yeah, that actually might be like a legit first line. Like, that's how they're playing. And I know this game was against San Jose, so, like, take that with a grain of salt, but like they've done it against good teams too. So, the big problem is that for most of this month, or at least good chunks of it, they've been really the only line that's been doing anything. We've talked about how much the second line had struggled when it was Marchand, Lindholm, Coyle. Like, they were getting a lot of defensive assignments. They're getting pinned in. They really weren't doing much offensively. maybe that changes now with Poitras there. Like that line certainly got off to a good start. Monday, we'll see if that continues. Obviously, that becomes a line that you use a little differently. And I had made the case to use that line differently even when Lindholm was there. Like I just don't love the idea of having a second line that's like already struggling offensively and then just burying them with tough assignments in the defensive zone. Like, yeah, from a hockey standpoint, it might be your best chance of like winning a certain game, but it doesn't help those guys' confidence. Like those guys need to see some pucks go in to start feeling good about themselves. And that just wasn't happening the way that line was getting used when Elias Lindholm was centering it.
And I was going to say, like, moving Elias Lindholm to the third line when he was brought in to be a first line center. But like, if you think about what it does, maybe it allows you to use your third line in different defensive situations because Elias Lindholm's a good 200-foot player. Maybe it just spreads out the depth a little bit and helps, take a little bit of pressure off the second line with Poitras stepping in and playing that second line center role. I don't know what your feelings are about the movement of Elias Lindholm with Wahlstrom and Lettieri on the third line. Is it like a sign that things aren't going well for him? Or do you think it's just a strategy thing? Do you think it's just, it's just what the matchup called for today? What are your thoughts?
Scott?
Well, I think it's a couple things. But first and foremost, I think Elias Lindholm played one of his worst games in a long time on Saturday. Like, I mean, he was legitimately bad in that game. So if it was punishment for that and like, hey, you've earned a demotion, I'd be fine with that. Like, he really wasn't holding his spot in the top six. I don't think it's so much to turn the third line into like a defensive line. I mean, I guess it depends on who you have with them, but on Monday it was Oliver Wahlstrom and Vinny Lettieri, so that's not really going to be a shutdown line. But that is also a line that scored. Vinny Lettieri, Bridget, you brought him up briefly, but like that goal that he scores, the Bruins' first goal of the game, comes off good offensive zone cycle shift from that line, and they had a couple of those. So. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it frees up Lindholm a little. Maybe it gets him going. But my real takeaway there is like, I want to give Poitras a real run on the second line. Like this was an encouraging start. What I want to see is like really give that a chance to work. Don't, say next game, Elias Lindholm plays well and Poitras's a little quiet. I don't want to see you immediately switch back because hey, Elias Lindholm is the guy who gets paid to be in the top six, and Matt Poitras is just a kid. So, so we're only going to use this for like a game and a half. Like, I want to see this last a little longer.
It's also worth mentioning that Trent Frederick didn't play against San Jose, and I think he was scratched due to illness. So, going forward, you would think that would be Lindholm, Lettieri, and Frederick. I don't know. I mean, I would assume that.
Which would be a more defensive, like I feel like that could be a defensive line because Frederick is also a good 200-foot player. He's got the center mentality and gets back and defends.
Well, he can be when he wants to be.
He can be. It's in his skill set.
He hasn't been much of this season.
Okay,
but he's a player that, but he's a player that I feel like has been coming along the last few weeks, and he seems emotionally engaged, and he seems engaged in all three zones. He's playing with more confidence, more purpose. So you're right to say what you said, Scott. We've been saying it all year, but he does appear to be a player that was trending upwards. So I guess that's positive. Elias Lindholm, look, when you've been as offensively challenged as he has been this year, are we scratching and clawing at positives that he got an empty net goal against the worst team in the league? Yep. Maybe sometimes that can actually go a long way, though, to see the puck go in the back of the net, no matter how you do it or who you do it against.
Yeah, and he ends up. So he didn't assist on Lettieri's goal, but he still ends up with a goal and an assist. You mentioned the empty netter, and he also had the secondary assist on Pasternak's power play goal, which we've talked about, like how much the power play weighs on these guys, right? Like that should be a way for all those guys in the top unit to rack up points. And instead, it's been the thing that all of them collectively have felt just awful about all season. It's just been weighing on them all year that, like, holy shit, like we just can't get this done. Like we just cannot pull ourselves out of this. And like you hear that when those guys talk about it. Like you can hear that, like, it weighs on them. So for that power play unit in general to score, for a Lindholm to pick up a point on it, like that's gotta feel good. So that's another way that, like, those guys can get going and start to build some confidence. And
Ryan looks like he's having like a disco over there.
well, yeah, Brian's clearly like looking something up. Like we can see the flash of like the computer reflecting.
It's like a mini rave.
Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, I was looking something up. Sorry, Scott.
What was it? Was it like an EDM festival or?
No, stay tuned. I'll go over it.
That was a live check-in on Elias Lindholm's post-game party after a multi-point.
Turning up on a Monday, but sorry, Scott. That was I got way too distracted.
No, I was pretty much done. I was just saying, like, the power play is another way that, like, Lindholm could start to feel better about his game, even if he's lining up on the third line at 5-on-5.
Yeah. So I was looking something up. I'll get to it in a little bit. Let's keep it to the here and now, though. So the Ottawa game, they are up 2 goals with the goalie pulled. You're playing a team that is neck and neck with you in the standings. They're ahead of you on points percentage and in the actual points as well. You needed a regulation win there. That would go a long way. That's a 4-point swing if you just hold on to the lead. And you have multiple chances and opportunities to ice the game with the goalie pulled. And of course, Elias Lindholm has that turnover behind the net, helps lead to the first, Senators time, goal to get back in the game, 5-4. They tied the game. Josh Norris, I think, with like 12 seconds left. So I want you guys to talk about the missed opportunity in Ottawa, and more importantly, or more broadly, just this team's defensive issues, their structural issues. Yes, they're out Charlie McAvoy. They've been without Hampus Lindholm. I don't know if you guys have any news on their timelines, but if this is something that they have to continue to deal with, this structure has to get better, or else this month, could look pretty ugly at the end of it when you look at their record over the course of the month.
Yeah, so McAvoy was going to be evaluated again after Monday's game. So I don't know if that literally means like on Monday after the game, or maybe Tuesday, or they're off on Tuesday. I don't know if McAvoy will be in the building for treatment, but some point early this week, he'll be reevaluated. And I guess we'll find out if he's ready to play. Obviously the Bruins have a tough stretch here where it's at New Jersey on Wednesday, host Ottawa Thursday, and then matinee against Colorado on Saturday. So that's three tough opponents crammed into about less than like a 90-hour span. So it'd be nice if you have McAvoy back by then. But and Hampus Lindholm has been he's been skating. He's gotten some practice time with the team in a non-contact jersey. Still no official timetable. So I guess until we see him out of the non-contact jersey and in a regular jersey, that would probably be the sign that he's actually close. But yeah, I mean, the Ottawa game, like, it just can't happen. Like, this team just can't afford games like that right now with how close this playoff race is, with, a month, a little over a month here to figure out if you're going to buy, sell, retool, whatever else you want to call their trade deadline approach. Like, those are the games that you can't let slip away. I mean, Monday would have been even worse if you lose to San Jose, but Ottawa's a team you're fighting with for a playoff spot. You can't let those that should have been, you get 2 points, Ottawa gets 0. And instead you just hand Ottawa 2 points. Yeah, the breakdowns against the extra attacker, like Elias Lindholm, you can't lose that battle. Like that's part of what you're here for, right? Is to be a defensive go-to center who helps you close out games like that. And he was just too soft on his stick and gets the puck taken away. The coverage on the tying goal, like Charlie Coyle has bad stick position. Brad Marchand looks exhausted at the end of the shift, and quite frankly, just like doesn't fight through it to get the coverage on Norris. Like he just looks like he's like standing there and reaching. Which Joe Sacco wouldn't directly say that that's what led to Marchand getting benched in overtime. He just called it a coach's decision, but I certainly think that was part of it. Marchand also had a failed clear early in that shift where Zadorov rims the puck around the boards and Marchand backs up way too far right into the defenseman at the point, and it ends up as a tie-up when if he steps up and plays the puck sooner, he should be able to get out of the zone. So I can't imagine Joe Sacco liked that shift from Marchand, and I think that's why he got benched in overtime.
The logic for me there with the Marchand thing, like I thought like maybe is he just too gassed? Like you saw him look tired at the end of regulation, and it was like in my mind in real time before we got the comments from Sacco after, it was like maybe he's just gassed. Like maybe he just spent, like doesn't have the energy left. Like
yeah, or you wonder about like an injury. Like is he lumbering around because he's hurt because something happened?
Yeah, and then you hear the coach's decision thing, and it's like, well, I guess that could still mean it was based off of being gassed or something, not an injury. I think that rules out injury, but like if you think about it this way, and they brought it up on the NESN broadcast, it's like, do we really want to be sending a message to him right now with him being the best overtime goal scorer? Because like you have still a chance to get 2 points in this game, and Marchand is like, you're taking out a huge asset on your 3-on-3. So like I get wanting to send a message, but do you actually think that set them up for their best chance to win? Because I didn't think so.
And when he was asked about it in the media, I want to say it was, did they practice yesterday, Scott?
They practiced
on
Sunday. Yeah.
His energy answering the questions seemed pretty melancholy, pretty. I don't know. Just normally, I feel like you'd see Marchand be like more energized, a little bit more pep in his answer, being like, "Yeah, I got to be better." Coach is right to do it, or whatever. And he just kind of seemed like his tone was he was still maybe a little bit, upset about how it happened. Not that he shouldn't be upset, but it looked like there may have just been like a disconnect. Like, there's something going on where he's just not seeing eye to eye with Sacco, maybe at least just in this one situation, perhaps.
You know what his tone kind of reminded me of was when Pastrnak was asked about getting benched by Montgomery earlier this season for the third period. And it's like, if you were to just look at a transcript, he says the right things. But when you watch and listen to it, like you're right. It's like it's hard to pinpoint, but you just kind of wonder, like, does he really mean what he's saying? Like, is he really buying it? Because that did not sound like, if you remember when Montgomery got in Marchand's face, like we did hear that more energized Marchand, where it's just like people are really making an issue out of that. Are you kidding me? And like I think that was legit honesty from Marchand. Like I think he had no issue with Montgomery getting in his face, and I think he felt like he deserved that. And you're right, like this was a little bit more of a subdued tone from him that, it does. It just kind of makes you wonder, like, does he really feel like it was justified this time? Or, does he kind of disagree with it, but doesn't want to say that publicly?
Isn't it strange to see two different head coaches in the same year have, some public displays of discipline with Marchand? It's just his play in general. Like, you're talking about a guy that's been around for 15 years in Marchand, and he's been an elite player in this league. He's won a Stanley Cup. He's a leader. He's been in a room with Chara as a leader and Bergeron, and I just try to envision, if I don't see two coaches publicly going at Bergeron or Chara in the same year. I'm not trying to cause anything here. I'm just talking about it. It's you don't see it very often, especially with Marchand. Like you just never really saw it, even with Cassidy as the coach, with Montgomery as his coach for the first 2 years, with Claude as his coach. I mean, Claude definitely disciplined Brad behind the scenes, but I don't know, to see Monty, who is ordinarily a very outgoing, bubbly personality, having his whole face and head turn red during a game, yelling at him, shoving him in the back, and against Utah, and obviously Sacco benching him in overtime. It's uncommon to see. And if it was one head coach in a season, okay, yeah, shit happens. But two head coaches, and Joe Sacco's been around for a long time. I just mentioned all the head coaches that have coached Brad Marchand. Sacco's been there the entire time. Not all of Marchand's career, but he was there when Claude was there, when Cassidy was there, when Monty was there, and now himself. So, Sacco is somebody that room respects, and I'm sure Brad Marchand and he have a ton of mutual respect, and maybe that's why he felt comfortable to do it to Brad. But it's just to see two head coaches and Brad kind of not see eye to eye in the same season halfway through is it's something new.
Yeah, and Sacco did reference that, like, it was. He said, I don't have the exact one in front of me, but he said something on Sunday about, like, we played the guys that we thought gave us, like, the best chance, or like something along those lines that was kind of based on how the game had gone. And it was a tough game for Marchand. Like, he had some, even beyond that final shift, like, he had some rough, it looked like he was just fighting the puck all night. Like, just didn't really have it. And so, like, maybe it's that in addition to that final shift on the extra attacker goal.
But, like, does it help them in overtime and in the shootout to not use him?
Yeah, I mean, overtime especially, right? Like, Marchand's been great in 3-on-3 overtime. He's like way up in the record books in career overtime goals. So yeah, it's tough. Like, I think it's fair both ways. Like, I generally don't blame coaches, for making an example of a guy. Like, especially, again, I thought Marchand's effort that final shift just wasn't good enough. Like, I know he's probably tired, but he was out there for a minute and a half. He wasn't out there for 3 minutes.
I mean, couldn't you just
you
go,
gotta
hey,
fight through it.
get your shit together, like, be better in overtime kind of thing? like
Yeah,
just like a hey, like.
I mean, that's probably what I would have done. Like, I don't think I'd go into overtime of a big game like that and not use Marchand. So I think that's also a completely fair second guess.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the San Jose game goes, one last thing I wanted to talk about in that game was just before Charlie Coyle, got the game-winning goal, massive save from Jonas Korpisalo to keep the Bruins tied. Eventually, moments later, they take the lead on the next shift. And if the Bruins can turn this month around with a win against San Jose, which obviously San Jose is not a good team. They got Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith, two great young players. Like, I loved watching those players. I mean, you can just tell how mature Celebrini is as a player. I mean, I think Mark Kaslik was a big boy, lined him up pretty good, and Celebrini just stiffed him, and just, Kaslik goes down. And when you have that much skill and you can play that tough, they got a really good player in him, obviously, and Will Smith. But outside of them, you expect the Bruins to get the 2 points. And it wasn't pretty, but they did. And the Korpisalo save, obviously huge. I mean, it's a swing moment there. So that's a great stop, and he deserves a shutout for that play.
Yeah, and I didn't love the goal he gave up to Smith. Obviously the Bruins, botched that play leading leading up to the chance in the first place. But, Smith's at about the face-off dot and beats him short side under the glove, not over it. So I didn't love that goal, but yeah, I think he more than made up for it. That sequence in the third period. Just some big saves on the penalty kill.
The save on Graf was the crazy one.
Definitely. Yeah, and that was even the one right before that from Wallman. Like Wallman didn't really get much on it, but just for Korpisalo to be in position. He made some big saves down the stretch, and this first game in 2 weeks, like Swayman was on a run here of 5 straight starts. So, I think you almost have to expect like a little bit of rust, and maybe that's what you see on the Smith goal. But he definitely stepped up in the third period.
Yeah, he hadn't played since January 5th, which like definitely. I mean, and I understand now that Swayman's playing as well as he has been, like letting him run with it a little bit more. Whereas earlier in the season, like there was some statistics to back up, like maybe splitting them more often, but they went away from that. And even though some of those games, those 5 games that Swayman was in were losses, he still has looked better. His stats have been better over those games. And Korpisalo did what he needed to do, after sitting and watching for quite some time. He came in and he still looked good. He didn't let it affect him. Obviously, once again, we've used the disclaimer, it's the Sharks. But anybody could have had that shot. It could have been from any team, that shot by Graf. Like it happened to be the Sharks, like, but he that was like a big time save that could have easily gone in the net, and Peak was kind of like landed on his pad and like he was scrambling, but he got the glove on it. So good for him. And I'm glad you brought him up, Brian, because sometimes we go like a whole podcast without talking about the goalies, when that's normally a good thing. It's like, okay, they did their job. But maybe sometimes you got to give credit where credit's due, and Korpisalo deserves it. So.
Well, and not to ping pong back and forth between the Ottawa game and the San Jose game, but since we're on the goaltending, Swayman gives up 5 goals or 6 goals. Well, no, it was a shootout goal. So 5 goals throughout the course of the play, and he still played a really strong game. Ottawa could have had 10 goals in that game if Swayman didn't make some point blank stops. I think the big play of criticism for Swayman was when the Bruins were still up 5-4. And he looked to go for what appeared to be a goal attempt, and gets knocked down, and then it gets in the back of the Bruins net. I think maybe some fans weren't too thrilled about that, but it's not often that you'll see a goalie give up 5 goals and sit there and say he still played a really good game. I think that was one of the exceptions for Swayman against Ottawa.
Yeah, he was really good most of the game, but yeah, I mean that whether it was a clear or he was trying to score, it looked to me like he was trying to score. It's a bad play, and it's a hard one to overlook. Like it cost you the game. It leads to the tying goal. So, that's like you just can't do it. So to me, like I still come away from that with the pretty sour taste as it relates to Swayman, because that's a play that just can't happen. Like you glove it down, you settle it. The safe play is either up the boards or get it to he had time to move it to a defenseman even. So, I mean, he in a 2-goal game, you don't mind that. Fine, take your shot. 1-goal game, you don't throw that up the middle of the ice.
Yeah, I hated that. I couldn't help but think to myself, is he doing that if Linus Ullmark's not in the house? Like, trying to
or if Alex Nedeljkovic of the Penguins hadn't scored the night before, like maybe he saw that highlight and here's my turn.
First NHL goalie he was the first NHL goalie with a goal and an assist in the same game, which is crazy.
Oh, wow.
He also Nedeljkovic now has 4 goals as a pro. He had 2 in the AHL and 1 in the ECHL too.
Yeah, I found that to be a ill-advised and immature play by Swayman there. Obviously hated that play. And Scott, you're right to sit there and over the course of a 60-minute game, it's tough to call out one play, but sometimes there are certain plays that have more magnitude than others, and that was one of them. I mean, that one absolutely led to the tying goal. So Bridget and Scott, I wanted to jump back to Cam Neely's comments last week just quickly, and just kind of get a big picture pulse here from the two of you, because we've talked about how important this month was for the Bruins. They still have some slates of games to go here prior to the Four Nations face-off. And on this podcast, we've all kind of talked about, let's see where they are at the end of January and Four Nations, and kind of go from there. And that kind of parallels Cam Neely's comments. He said, we want to see where we are in the standings, the closer we get to the trade deadline, and we essentially, there's two paths we can go, which is buy and retool. Even if they buy, I don't see them buying significantly. But in any event, I understand why Cam would say that. The Bruins are in the middle of a playoff race, and you have to look at things 1 year at a time. Neely has ownership to appease. They want to get into the playoffs, and then you can sit there and sell to fans, hey, get into the playoffs, anything can happen. Hot goalie, defense can get some structure to their game, whatever. Like, I get why he is saying that. But Bridget and Scott, I want to look at some numbers and from a bird's eye view, figure out if regardless what happens in the next month, if the Bruins already know what the answer is. And so if you'll indulge me for 1 second, this is all pre-Bruins Sharks, which was on Monday. Okay, so entering the game, the Bruins were 6th place in the Atlantic Division, 4th in the Eastern Conference wildcard race, 10th in the Eastern Conference, and 19th in the NHL standings based on points percentage. They were ranked 27th in the league in goal differential at -23, 30th in the league on the power play at 13.3%, 24th on the penalty kill at 75.7%, 26th in goals for per game, 2.7, 9th, which is not good, in goals against per game, which is 3.17, and 24th in team save percentage, 0.896. And then what I was looking up earlier was I was pressing the calendar back to January 2024. So over the last calendar year, on January 20th, 2024, the Bruins beat the Canadiens 9-4. On January 20th, 2025, they beat the Sharks 6-3. Over the last 365 days, the Bruins have a record of 43, 31, and 12. Straight up 500. So when you look at their team numbers this year, and you look at the fact that over the last calendar year in the regular season, they're a 500 hockey team straight up. Should this team be buying? If you actually take a step back and just look at what the state of the team is, should they be buying next month or, in a month and a half? Or should they sit there and realize who exactly they've been for the last year plus and act accordingly? That doesn't mean that they can't make the playoffs this year, but I don't think they should be buying. I think they should be just kind of, see where they are in a month. And I just think there's some self-awareness that they should be practicing, I think, going forward here.
Well, so I'll start by saying I don't think you need to pick a path now. I want to see how this next month goes. I think you could, I'm definitely not trading any high assets for rentals. Like, that's off the table. That I can cross out right now. But if you're telling me there's a deal out there where I can pick up someone with team control and who might be part of my plans next year, the year after, that intrigues me. Like, if it's now, it's probably not going to be a number one center, although look, Elias Pettersson and JT Miller are still front and center in a bunch of rumors. JT Miller, apparently, if you believe the reporting, there was a deal closed with the Rangers over the weekend that seems like fell apart at the last minute. So who knows what happens there? That's a little different. But even I don't know. Like, is there a second line winger available who has 2 years left after this? Like, that would be intriguing. That I might be willing to give up a little bit for. So I don't want to rule out buying altogether, but I think it has to be smart buying. It has to be more than just the rest of the season in mind. And you could also now, I've been frustrated when the Red Sox have tried to do something like this, but you could do that kind of buying, someone with team control, while still selling off your pending free agents. Like, you could also kind of do that middle path where you're doing a little bit of both, but it's with the idea of we're replacing what we're trading away, but with players who have more control, who we see as more likely to be part of our future.
Yeah, and getting ahead of people leaving in free agency.
Yeah. So, like, I can see that. I think that would make sense. And that doesn't give up on the season, but it also isn't like a desperation grab where you're like, really, like, we're going all in on this 8th, 9th place team. Like, you're right. Like, I wouldn't do that, but there's other options. There's gray area between full out buying and full out selling.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you look at it as an opportunity to make next year's team better, not get screwed over on guys just leaving for nothing, like say Trent Frederick, like cover your butt in that way. But like you said, Scott, like maybe you're looking to trade for someone now rather than sign a free agent in the offseason. Like if someone is on the trade block that's intriguing to you now, depending on the ask, you do it. So kind of like getting ahead of off-season stuff. But back to your original point, Scott, still time to decide and see where things pan out. But the wild card race in the East is so dense that there's so many teams that are currently in the same situation that are trying to decide if they're buyers or sellers, which I think it kind of adds a weird element to this because a lot of the times, like say Columbus at this point already knows they're sellers. So you're like shopping around with sellers, but like, since there's fewer sellers that know it right now, like you don't necessarily know where, like what calls to make. And who might be available based on, a rental or this, whatever, because the next month could determine that they're going the other way. So it makes it weird. It definitely adds an extra layer to it.
Well, Bridget and Scott, I gotta be honest with you. I'm a tad bit conflicted right now. And here's why. Because I would hate to not see playoff hockey in Boston on any given year. Playoff hockey is fun. I love it. It's fun. But right now, as we talk, the Bruins, based on points percentage in the standings, they would be the 14th overall pick in the 2025 NHL draft. And they've been trying so far. Like, they're not even that far away from having a top 10 pick in the NHL draft this coming summer. And I'm sitting here saying, what would be better for the team long term? To enter the playoffs in 2025 as the 15th or 16th best team in the field? Or maybe just be responsible with some pending free agents, try to get what you can for them. And if in the meantime you slip to the 11th pick overall, ooh, that's not too shabby if you're a team that's trying to, find their future at number one center as well. Like and when I say I'm conflicted, I'm being genuine. I honestly am like, I think big term, long term, what's best for the team could be the latter, but I don't want to miss out on, the fun of playoff hockey. But I don't know. I just what would benefit the team?
I don't think they're no. And I can already hear the typing of the Don Sweeney critics being like, well, he wouldn't be able to draft the right person at 11 anyway. So
and that's a different conversation because, I'm not even saying I'd want him to be the guy, but I don't think he's not going to be the guy. But What do you guys think would be better for the team long term? Like I said, be 15 or 16 out of 16 in the field this spring in the playoffs, or maybe be responsible with some assets while they're under your control, and have as much cap space. They'll probably have $20 million with the cap moving up this summer to re-sign certain free agents that they want, and then other free agents in the market. Maybe you hit on a couple of pieces in the draft, maybe a top 12 pick, and you're right back at it next year. I don't even think this is a full rebuild situation I'm talking about, but I think some, like I said, some self-awareness could help this team long term. I'd hate, the one thing I don't want to see them do is stand pat at the deadline, bring in a middle six forward for like a third round pick, and then they lose in the first round, and then you just didn't really optimize some players while they were in your system.
Yeah, I think that's fair, which is why I'm still open to trading away really anyone that I don't plan on re-signing, or even trying to work a trade with someone who, might be under team control longer that you don't really consider part of your future, and but for the draft pick, I think if that happens naturally, if you're just not a good enough team, then so be it. Then you play that lottery ticket. But I'm not, unless things really go south. I'm not full off selling.
Well, you're a big karma guy, Scott. You're a big karma guy.
Yeah. Well, so there's two examples these last couple of years that I would point to as kind of the good and bad of what we're discussing. So 2 years ago, Washington Capitals were fringe playoff team pretty much all season. And then they hit a losing streak right before the trade deadline and decided to sell. And that was the year that the Bruins got Dmitry Orlov and Garnet Hathaway for them, which all came together like 2 days before the deadline when no one had been talking about the Capitals as sellers. That deadline wound up really paying off for them when you look at where the Capitals are now 2 years later. The Athletic actually had a great article about this on basically like what that deadline meant to the Capitals and what they've done since. Like the first round pick they got from the Bruins, they then traded to, they traded to Toronto for Rasmus Sandin, who is now has really taken off for them this season. And just some of the ways they use those assets. So that's it, sure. Okay. So if the Bruins really fall off right before the deadline, there's your blueprint. There's what you try to do. The bad example I would highlight is what the Philadelphia Flyers did last year, which is they were in a playoff spot and sold at the deadline because they thought, well, this isn't our year anyways. We're looking to the future. And now they've taken another step back this year and look no closer to contending, in my mind. I know they have Matvei Michkov, who's an extremely talented young player, but that team still has so many holes and such a cloudy future that I'm like, I don't know, maybe that team should have tried to make the playoffs and gain some experience and tried to take advantage when they, had a team that could have made it. And so they sold, their season fell apart. And I don't know, how close does anyone think the Flyers are to contending? When is their retool or rebuild or whatever done? Maybe a year or two from now, we'll talk about this and I'll be wrong. And we'll be talking about the Flyers as one of the top teams in the NHL. But I feel like that team still has so much work to do to try to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, this is totally it's related, but it's not very closely related. This weekend, I was sitting next to Jim Tortorella, John Tortorella's brother, who works up at UNH. And I talked to him for a little bit. And he's like, I'm the more calm brother. And Scott was like, that's a low bar. And by the way, at one point he did slam his fist on the counter and my stuff shook, and I looked at him and I smiled and he smiled back at me because he knew what I was thinking.
That's funny. Yeah, you running into coaches in the NHL and their family. Didn't you see Lavalette too at a diner in Attleboro or something like that?
No, he is married to someone from Attleboro.
Oh, okay.
So.
So this brings up
one of my coaches growing up was college roommates with Peter Laviolette. Just
So
as a random aside, since we're bringing up connections.
Well, it's because, and he has connections here because he coached the Providence Bruins, so he was around here. Yeah, so he has connections around
here. So this kind of brings up something I mentioned online this a few days ago as well, which had some good discourse among fans and stuff. But the last time that the Bruins, in my opinion, were this just dead in the middle, like mediocre, was about 10 years ago when they hired Don Sweeney. And in that situation, the Bruins realized they had to get some draft collateral. And this was kind of like just prior to their youth movement in like 16, 17, 18, where Carlo came in and DeBrusk and McAvoy and Grzelcyk and others. And in order to do so, they traded Milan Lucic to the Los Angeles Kings, who at the time, Lucic was a fan favorite in Boston and a premier power forward in the league at the time still. And they traded a young up-and-coming Dougie Hamilton to Calgary for a first-round draft pick. Now, they were able to get 3 first-round draft picks in 2015. We all know that story, right? We don't need to rehash that. But the willingness to go out there and move some important pieces to get some draft capital, I think is something that just it needs to be considered again 10 years later, because I'm not going to name names, but just the willingness to listen. But here's the big difference though. Back then, Don Sweeney was, and because people mentioned how Dougie wanted out and Lucic had to get rid of, like, I get all that. Like, maybe there's somebody on the team right now who wants out. I don't know.
Well,
but
yeah, and the other thing I mentioned is that team was in salary cap hell and had to ditch contracts too.
100%. That is true. But that's kind of where I was going with it. Was the biggest difference here is that was Don Sweeney's first months as Bruins GM. He had a long leash and a license to go out and kind of cause havoc to try to rectify Peter Chiarelli's cap mess. But now 10 years later, it's kind of Don's mess. And anything he does to try to sell, I think, makes his job vulnerable because the team could potentially go back a little bit. And I'm not sure if he has a willingness to do so. So it kind of leads me to ask you guys this question of, Scott, even the very reasonable, rational approach that you mentioned, where you can kind of do a little bit of both this deadline. You think he'd even be willing to do anything like that? Or do you think he's just going to try to, use players as his own rentals? And I don't know. I question if he'll do it.
Well, I mean, he better be willing to do it. Like, because even if you think we're just going to ride it out and make the playoffs because that's what I have to do to save my job. Well, I think we've seen that this team, as constructed, could very easily miss the playoffs. They could very easily go cold again, or they could get bounced in 4 or 5 games in the first round. So I don't know how far either of those things would actually go. Certainly missing the playoffs and not doing anything with an eye to the future, to me, like, I feel like that would have to be the end of his job. I don't really know how they could justify keeping him after that. Like, if you hang on to guys that aren't part of your future and then miss the playoffs, like, that's the worst of both worlds. Even if you miss it and you're just an easy out, I don't know. I mean, even if you make it and then you're an easy out, I don't know, like, how far even that's going. Like, it feels like that's not. I don't know. Maybe that is good enough for the Jacobs and everything everyone says about them just wanting a couple of home games. Maybe that's true, but it doesn't really feel like it. Like, I thought last week when Charlie Jacobs spoke and was talking about like 50 years of Jacobs family ownership, he almost sounded like, when he brings up like wish we had more cups, he almost sounded like a little sheepish. Like, I do think like it gets to him a little, and maybe more than his dad. I think Charlie is, he's a little more in touch and like a little more like actually does want to win and isn't happy that his family has just one Stanley Cup to their name.
Yeah, he pays attention to the product, I think. When you hear him talk, he
He was
doesn't really
talking
give
about
you
their breakout. I was like,
Yeah, no, I was surprised. I mean, he owns a
Maybe they
team. He
should
should
bring
be
him
paying
in.
attention. Yeah, I don't want to give the owner credit for watching their
Right.
team, but not all owners do. He does appear to be in, as you said, in tune with them, Scott. But yeah, lots to play out here. Just talking about it. Yep.
I was just gonna say we don't have a lot of time left, but this is just a thought that I've had, and it's paranoia because of past situations, and I hope it doesn't happen. But are either of you paranoid that even though Poitras playing well, they're gonna be like, time to send him down for more development?
Oof.
I
They can't do it. They cannot do it.
I guess like nothing really surprised. Like they've made so many baffling moves this season that nothing would really shock me. But I mean, if they really just want to like troll the fans, like then do that. But I don't know. I mean, like if he goes 10 games without a point, like there is a certain point where like you can have that conversation, and it's like okay, maybe a little more time would be a good thing. By the way, like he's still only played 25 games in the AHL for a 20-year-old kid. Like it's not the end of the world if he ends up back in Providence at some point. A lot of guys play a hell of a lot more games than that before sticking in the more AHL games than that before sticking in the NHL. But if he's gonna make an impact like he has these first 3 games back up, where he has 3 assists, he's a +2. So Cam Neely's saying, "Got to outscore your mistakes." Like he's clearly doing that. If he keeps playing like this, there would be no justification.
And he's a legitimate option in your top 6, like as that second line center, which you cannot say for pretty much anyone else you would call up. Like they weren't even using Lysell in that situation. So I don't know. He's a good playmaker. I have paranoia because of previous transactions back and forth with Providence. I think most people listening to this podcast are probably just as confused about them as we are, just based on seeing comments and tweets and different things like that. I think it'd be a huge mistake, but there's reason to be worried about it. Now, in this situation, like if he goes quiet, sure, send him back down. But like I'm talking about what he's tomorrow, or like you know what I mean? Like I just feel like at any point we could just have to re-record a podcast and be like,
I mean, points are at a premium right now, and they got what, 3 wins this month or 4? 3, 4? 4 now?
3, I think.
3. Okay, and he was a major factor in 2 of them. I mean, the opening goal against Tampa Bay, the assist to Frederick on that goal sparked the team. I thought for the rest of the first half of the game, they end up winning that game. We've talked about this San Jose game, being involved with the Coyle goals. I mean, he's been an integral part of your team getting very valuable points to make the playoffs. So that would be spitting in his face to send him back down when, Johnny Beecher got his first goal in 40 games against Ottawa. I mean, like, I know Johnny Beecher's not paid to be a top 6 player, but you get my point. Like, I think that would just be completely disrespectful and counterproductive.
And Poitras did see his minutes go up in Monday's game against the Sharks. He'd only played 10 minutes the Ottawa game, but then and special teams was a factor in that. But yeah, his minutes were up. There was on the NESN broadcast, Judd mentioned that Sacco said it was a point of like that they wanted to make, that he saw more ice time. So, I mean, maybe his development in Providence has afforded him the ability to play a more, like, might be more conditioned because he was playing more minutes down there, but he's still being effective in his shortened minutes in Boston. And I don't know, like, it opened up Charlie Coyle. Can Charlie Coyle slide back to center? Yes. But wouldn't you rather have an option to have Poitras there? And, who cares if Wahlstrom has to miss a game here or there and they rotate bottom six guys in and out rather than send Poitras back down and, lose out on his playmaking ability. I only bring it up because I just am skeptical for a good reason this year that there could be a move made that doesn't necessarily make sense to us with Poitras. So,
well, and I'll have to say, since you brought up the minutes, Poitras only played he only got one or two shifts in the third period against Ottawa, and I didn't love that. I know, Montgomery would do that times last year, and I even defended it several times. But that was a team that was playing winning hockey and was in a playoff position, and you could look at him and be like, well, okay, he's got stuff to learn. He's done we're a year later, he's done a lot of learning. I feel like at some point you have to trust him in third periods of games where you have a lead, or at least give him a chance. And in that case, you had a 2-goal lead. That's a really tight checking, hard fought 1-goal game. Maybe, but you have a 2-goal lead. You have a little bit of a cushion. I feel like they should have been using him a little bit more in that third period because, by the way, you can keep pushing for another goal. You don't have to just sit back. In fact, you shouldn't just sit back. So I didn't love seeing that.
All right. Well, hopefully he gets a chance to get some more ice time against New Jersey and Ottawa when they play them again, this time at the Garden. So 2 very big games for the Bruins. That Ottawa in particular, should be very entertaining. There was a lot of animosity and very, very much a playoff atmosphere in Ottawa in their most recent game. So we will be back on Friday to discuss what's that?
They have a back-to-back this week.
Okay.
Wednesday, Thursday. So Friday, I think that'd be a good guess on when the next episode would come out. So,
all right,
perfect.
Well, wait, I gotta plug something. Don't.
Yes, that's right.
Don't sign me off yet, Brian.
All you, go for it.
All right, if people are listening to this prior to puck drop on Tuesday, I'm doing play-by-play for the Women's Bean Pods at TD Garden. Get tickets and go, or watch the Nesson broadcast. Our first game is at 4:30. Second game is supposed to be at 7. Sometimes it gets moved back. It's BC Harvard in the first game. That was the same matchup as last year. Went to a shootout. It was a really good game, even though it was a third place game. And then rematch of the championship game, BU against Northeastern. That game went to overtime. Was a great game. And we had over 10,000 people went to last year's, and it seems like there's momentum for it to be even more this year based on some stats we have so far. So grab tickets, go, or you might be stuck listening to me broadcast the game. But
I'm feeling momentum for BU to actually beat Northeastern this year too. So go Terriers.
Yeah, I believe their men's team is going to support. I don't know if they were at the game today to support Macklin, the Bruins game, but
I think some of them were. I don't know if it was the whole team.
I think BC's whole team was there to support Will, but anyway,
I think the entire town of Lexington was there. I heard on Nesson they said Will Smith had between 150 and 170 family and friends there.
Good for him. He scored too.
Yeah.
He also scored 4. That's not the first time he scored at TD Garden. He scored 4 goals in the Hockey East Championship game last year. Sorry to bring that up, Scott, because it was BC over BU. But...
Are we done yet? Is this episode over?
I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you all very much for listening. Bridget, Scott, thank you. We'll talk to you all on Friday. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.